Greetings, advanced students. We are still laying the foundations before we get into Revelation itself. These preliminary studies will pay off, though, I guarantee you. Today, we undertake one of the most intellectually rigorous and hermeneutically complex studies in Old Testament prophetic literature as we examine Daniel chapters 8 and 9. These passages represent what many scholars consider the apex of predictive prophecy in the Hebrew Bible, containing mathematical precision, historical specificity, and theological profundity that have captivated interpreters for over 2 millennia. Before we engage with our primary texts, we must establish our methodological framework and acknowledge the scholarly landscape surrounding these chapters. These passages sit at the intersection of multiple academic disciplines: biblical studies, ancient Near Eastern history, comparative literature, textual criticism, and chronological studies. Our approach will integrate historical critical methodology with careful linguistic analysis while remaining sensitive to both the ancient context and the theological implications of our findings. The book of Daniel occupies a unique position within the Hebrew canon, traditionally placed among the Ketuvim or writings rather than among the Nevi'im or prophets. This canonical placement reflects both the book's composite literary character and its distinctive apocalyptic elements. The text presents itself as the work of a Jewish exile in the Babylonian and Persian courts, though critical scholarship has long debated questions of authorship, dating, and literary unity. Chapters 8 and 9 belong to what scholars typically identify as the second major section of Daniel, chapters 7 through 12, which are distinguished by their apocalyptic character and their focus on eschatological themes. Unlike the court tales of chapters 1 through 6, these chapters present complex symbolic visions that require angelic interpretation and deal with the ultimate destiny of Israel and the nations. The linguistic evidence supports this division, as chapters 2 through 7 are written in Aramaic, while chapters 1 and 8 through 12 are composed in Hebrew. This bilingual character has generated extensive scholarly discussion regarding composition history, though for our purposes today, we will focus on the canonical form of the text and its interpretive significance. Our passage opens with precise chronological anchoring. In the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar the king, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, subsequent to the one which appeared to me previously. This reference to the 3rd year of Belshazzar places us definitively in 550 BCE, according to the consensus of ancient Near Eastern chronological studies. The phrase, subsequent to the one which appeared to me previously, creates explicit literary connection to the vision of chapter 7, establishing a sequence of revelations that build upon one another. The geographical setting proves equally significant. Daniel describes finding himself in the citadel of Susa, which is in the province of Elam beside the Ulai Canal. Archaeological and historical research has confirmed that Susa served as one of the 4 primary capitals of the Persian Empire, along with Babylon, Ecbatana, and Persepolis. The Ulai Canal, identified with the modern Karkay River, was a major waterway that provided both practical and symbolic significance to the region. This geographical precision is not merely literary decoration, but serves several important functions. First, it grounds the vision in real geographical space, lending concrete specificity to the prophetic revelation. Second, it anticipates the Persian Empire's administrative structure, as Susa would indeed become a center of imperial power. Third, it creates symbolic resonance, as water sources in ancient Near Eastern literature often serve as places of divine revelation and cosmic significance. The vision proper begins with Daniel's observation of a ram which had 2 horns standing in front of the canal. The Hebrew text employs the definite article, suggesting not just any ram, but a specific significant ram that Daniel recognizes as central to the vision. The detail that the 2 horns were long, but one was longer than the other, with the longer one coming up last, proves crucial for historical interpretation. This description corresponds precisely with the historical relationship between Media and Persia within the combined empire. Initially, the Median kingdom held greater prominence, but Persian influence gradually increased until Cyrus II effectively subordinated the Median kingdom to Persian control. The longer horn coming up last accurately reflects this historical development. The ram's behavior is described in terms that clearly evoke imperial expansion. I saw the ram butting westward, northward, and southward, and no beasts could stand before him, nor was there anyone to rescue from his power, but he did as he pleased and magnified himself. This tripartite directional expansion corresponds to the actual pattern of Persian conquest under Cyrus and his successors. The phrase, "he did as he pleased and magnified himself," employs Hebrew terminology that will recur throughout Daniel's apocalyptic literature. The root GDL, to be great, to magnify, appears repeatedly in contexts describing human pride that sets itself against divine authority. This linguistic choice foreshadows the theological critique that will emerge more explicitly in subsequent visions. The second major symbol introduces dramatic conflict. Behold, a male goat was coming from the west over the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. The description of movement without touching the ground has long been recognized as an extraordinarily apt metaphor for the speed of Alexander's conquests. Alexander's campaigns, beginning in 334 BCE with the crossing of the Hellespont, achieved in slightly over a decade what the Persian Empire had built over 2 centuries. The phrase, "over the surface of the whole earth," reflects the ancient perception of Alexander's conquests as genuinely universal in scope, extending from Macedonia to India. The conspicuous horn between his eyes clearly represents singular, powerful leadership. In ancient Near Eastern iconography, horns consistently symbolize strength and authority, while the positioning between the eyes suggests intelligence and strategic vision. This combination of power and wisdom perfectly characterizes Alexander's historical significance. The confrontation between the goat and ram is described with vivid intensity. He came up to the ram that had the 2 horns which I had seen standing in front of the canal, and rushed at him in his mighty wrath. And I saw him come beside the ram, and he was enraged at him. And he struck the ram and shattered his 2 horns, and the ram had no strength to withstand him. So he hurled him to the ground and trampled on him, and there was none to rescue the ram from his power. This language conveys not merely military defeat, but complete and systematic destruction. The Hebrew terminology employed here draws from the semantic field of violent conquest and total domination. The phrase, "none to rescue," emphasizes the completeness of Persian defeat and the failure of any allied powers to provide assistance. Historically, this description accurately reflects the decisive nature of Alexander's victories over Persian forces. The battles of Granicus, 334 BCE, Issus, 333 BCE, and Gaugamela, 331 BCE, represented not merely tactical victories, but the systematic dismantling of Persian imperial power. The capture of Persepolis and the burning of Xerxes' palace symbolically marked the end of Persian hegemony. The vision then describes the transformation of Greek power following Alexander's death, but as soon as he was mighty, the large horn was broken, and in its place there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven. This symbolism proves remarkably accurate historically. Alexander's death in Babylon in 323 BCE at age 32 created an immediate succession crisis. The Hebrew phrase, "as soon as he was mighty," captures the tragic irony that Alexander died at the very pinnacle of his power and influence. His empire, which had taken over a decade to construct, immediately began fragmenting. The 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven correspond to the eventual stabilization of Alexander's empire under 4 major successor kingdoms: the Antigonid dynasty in Macedonia and Greece, the Seleucid Empire in Syria and Mesopotamia, the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, and the kingdom of Pergamon in Asia Minor. While the initial period following Alexander's death involved numerous contenders and shifting alliances, these four major divisions emerged as the stable successors to Alexandrine power. The phrase, "toward the four winds of heaven," employs cosmological language that suggests divine sovereignty over this political fragmentation. The vision's focus then shifts to its most theologically significant element. Out of one of them came forth a rather small horn which grew, exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land. This little horn becomes the primary subject of the remainder of the vision and represents one of the most clearly fulfilled prophecies in the Hebrew Bible. The identification of this little horn with Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who ruled the Seleucid Empire from 175 to 164 BCE, has achieved near universal scholarly consensus. The geographical expansion toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land corresponds precisely with Antiochus's military campaigns against Egypt south, Parthia, east, and Judea, the beautiful land. The regular sacrifice, Tamid, refers to the twice daily offerings that constituted the heart of Jewish temple worship. These offerings, prescribed in Numbers 28, 3-8, represented the continuous relationship between God and his people. Their cessation would therefore constitute not merely religious disruption, but a fundamental breach in the covenant relationship. Historical records confirm that Antiochus IV instituted systematic persecution of Jewish religious practices beginning around 167 BCE. He prohibited circumcision, Sabbath observance, and Torah study, while requiring participation in Hellenistic religious practices. Most dramatically, he desecrated the Jerusalem temple by sacrificing a pig on the altar and erecting a statue of Zeus Olympius in the Holy of Holies. The vision provides specific temporal parameters for this persecution. For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be properly restored. This numerical precision demands careful analysis, as it represents one of the most specific chronological predictions in prophetic literature. The phrase evenings and mornings clearly alludes to the twice-daily sacrificial system established in the Torah. Each day required both an evening offering and a morning offering, creating a pattern that defined Jewish religious temporality. If we understand 2,300 evenings and mornings as referring to individual sacrificial times rather than complete days, we arrive at 1,150 actual days, or approximately 3 years and 2 months. This calculation proves historically significant because available evidence suggests that Antiochus's persecution of Jewish religious practices lasted approximately this duration. While ancient chronological records remain incomplete, the beginning of systematic persecution around 167 BCE and its termination with the rededication of the temple under the Maccabees around 164 BCE corresponds remarkably with the prophetic timeline. The vision concludes with angelic interpretation provided by Gabriel, whose appearance Daniel describes in terms that emphasize both divine authority and accessible communication. Gabriel's interpretation removes any ambiguity regarding the major symbols. The ram, which you saw with the 2 horns, represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece, and the large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. This interpretive framework establishes several crucial hermeneutical principles. First, it demonstrates that apocalyptic symbolism, while complex, is not arbitrary, but corresponds to specific historical realities. Second, it indicates that prophetic literature operates within concrete historical frameworks rather than purely abstract theological concepts. Third, it shows that divine revelation can achieve remarkable precision regarding future historical developments. Gabriel's explanation continues with description of the little horn's activities. In the latter period of their rule, when the transgressors have run their course, a king will arise, insolent and skilled in intrigue. The phrase, when the transgressors have run their course, suggests that this persecution will occur in the context of Jewish spiritual decline, adding theological complexity to the historical prediction. The description of this king as insolent and skilled in intrigue corresponds precisely with historical accounts of Antiochus IV, whose political maneuvering and religious policies reflected both arrogance and cunning. The phrase, "his power will be mighty, but not by his own power," hints at supernatural dimensions to this persecution, suggesting that earthly persecution of God's people involves cosmic spiritual conflict. Having established the historical framework of Daniel 8, we now turn to chapter 9, which presents an entirely different prophetic paradigm while maintaining thematic connections to the preceding material. Where chapter 8 focused on Gentile empires and their impact on Israel, chapter 9 centers specifically on Jewish history and messianic expectation. The literary structure of chapter 9 divides into two major sections: Daniel's intercessory prayer, verses 1 to 19, and Gabriel's prophetic revelation, verses 20 to 27. This structural division emphasizes the relationship between human spiritual preparation and divine revelation, suggesting that prophetic understanding often emerges from contexts of prayer and spiritual sensitivity. Daniel's prayer, prompted by his reading of Jeremiah's prophecy concerning 70 years of Babylonian captivity, establishes the theological foundation for the prophetic revelation that follows. The prayer demonstrates several crucial characteristics that inform our understanding of the subsequent prophecy. First, Daniel's prayer reflects deep identification with his people's spiritual condition. Second, the prayer demonstrates careful attention to previous biblical revelation. Third, Daniel's prayer emphasizes divine covenant faithfulness despite human unfaithfulness. His confidence that God will restore Israel rests not on Israel's merit, but on God's character and covenant promises. This theological foundation provides the basis for the remarkable chronological precision that follows. Gabriel's response introduces one of the most mathematically precise prophecies in the Hebrew Bible. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city. The Hebrew phrase shavuim shivim literally means 77s, though the specific temporal unit requires determination from context and subsequent fulfillment. The prophecy outlines 6 specific objectives that will be accomplished within this 77 time frame: to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. These 6 objectives clearly transcend mere political or military events, pointing instead to fundamental theological realities that address the human condition before God. The language employed draws from the semantic fields of sacrifice, atonement, and covenant fulfillment, suggesting that this prophecy concerns the ultimate resolution of Israel's spiritual crisis. The first objective, to finish the transgression, employs the Hebrew root kala, which means to complete, bring to an end, or fulfill. In prophetic literature, this terminology often refers to the completion of divine judgment or the fulfillment of divine purposes. The specific transgression in view appears to be the corporate rebellion that led to exile and continues to characterize Israel's relationship with God. To make an end of sin uses similar terminology, but focuses specifically on the cessation of sinful behavior and its consequences. The Hebrew construction suggests not merely the forgiveness of sin, but its actual termination as a defining characteristic of human existence. To make atonement for iniquity employs standard sacrificial terminology, kippur, that refers to the covering or removal of guilt through appropriate sacrifice. This language directly connects the prophecy to the Levitical sacrificial system while pointing toward its ultimate fulfillment. To bring in everlasting righteousness introduces the positive aspect of this transformation. Rather than merely addressing sin's negative consequences, this objective points toward the establishment of permanent right relationship with God. The term everlasting, olam, suggests that this righteousness will transcend temporal limitations. To seal up vision and prophecy has generated extensive interpretive discussion. The Hebrew verb chatam can mean either to seal for protection or to seal as completion. In this context, it likely refers to the fulfillment of prophetic revelation, indicating that the events described will complete the prophetic program concerning Israel's spiritual restoration. To anoint the most holy presents perhaps the most significant interpretive challenge. The Hebrew text reads Kodesh Kadashim, which could refer to the most holy place in the temple, a most holy object, or a most holy person. The context suggests that a person is in view, particularly given the explicit reference to Messiah the Prince in the following verse. The temporal structure of the prophecy divides the 70 weeks into specific periods, from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince. There will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. This provides a total of 69 weeks, or 483 years if we understand these as year weeks, leading to the appearance of Messiah the Prince. The identification of the initial decree presents one of the primary interpretive challenges of this passage. 3 potential decrees appear in the post-exilic literature, each with different chronological implications. First, Cyrus's decree in 539 BCE, 2 Chronicles 36, 22-23, Ezra, 1-2 primarily concerned the return of exiles and the rebuilding of the temple. While this decree marked the beginning of the restoration period, it did not specifically address the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls and civic infrastructure. Second, Darius's decree around 518 BCE, Ezra 6:8, reaffirmed Cyrus's original decree and provided additional financial support for temple reconstruction. However, this decree also focused primarily on religious rather than civic restoration. Third, Artaxerxes' decree to Ezra in 457 BCE, Ezra 7:12-13, provided comprehensive authorization for religious, legal, and social restoration. This decree granted Ezra authority to appoint judges, establish legal systems, and restore comprehensive Jewish community life. If we apply our mathematical calculation to each of these potential starting points, we find that only the 457 BCE date produces a result that aligns with New Testament chronology. Beginning in 457 BCE, 69 weeks of years, 483 years, brings us to approximately 26 CE, which corresponds remarkably with the beginning of Jesus' public ministry following his baptism by John the Baptist. This calculation assumes a 360-day prophetic year, which corresponds to the calendar system used in ancient Near Eastern chronological calculations. The precision of this mathematical relationship has been noted by scholars across the theological spectrum, regardless of their particular interpretive commitments. The prophecy continues with the statement that after the 62 weeks, Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. The Hebrew phrase yikaret, translated as cut off, appears frequently in the Old Testament to describe capital punishment or violent death, often in contexts where divine judgment falls upon covenant violators. The timing is further specified as occurring in the middle of the week, suggesting that Messiah's death would occur roughly halfway through the final 7-year period. If we accept the chronological framework established above, Jesus' crucifixion around 30 CE would indeed fall in the middle of that final 7-year period. The prophecy concludes with a description of destruction that would follow Messiah's death. The people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. This language clearly points to foreign military conquest and the historical fulfillment in the Roman destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 CE provides remarkable correspondence with the prophetic prediction. The phrase, "its end will come with a flood," employs metaphorical language that frequently appears in Hebrew literature to describe military invasion. The image of flood suggests overwhelming, unstoppable force that sweeps away existing structures and institutions. The theological implications of this prophetic framework prove profound and far-reaching. If our interpretation accurately reflects the text's intended meaning, Daniel chapter 9 provides precise chronological prediction of the Messiah's appearance and death, followed by the destruction of the Jewish religious system that had defined covenant relationship since the Mosaic period. This interpretation suggests that the Old Testament sacrificial system, while divinely instituted, was always intended as preparation for ultimate fulfillment in Messiah's atoning work. The cessation of sacrifice predicted in the prophecy would therefore represent not divine abandonment, but divine fulfillment of sacrificial purpose. The precision of the chronological prediction also raises important questions about the nature of biblical prophecy and divine foreknowledge. The mathematical accuracy of the 69 weeks calculation suggests that divine revelation can achieve remarkable specificity regarding future historical developments, indicating that biblical prophecy operates according to principles that transcend human predictive capability. Yet despite these acknowledged difficulties, the fundamental structure of the prophecy, a decree, rebuilding, Messiah's appearance and death, followed by destruction, aligns remarkably with the historical sequence of events in the 1st century CE. This correspondence between prediction and fulfillment provides strong evidence for the supernatural character of biblical revelation. For contemporary students of biblical literature, these passages in Daniel demonstrate several crucial principles that inform our broader understanding of Scripture and its interpretation. First, they illustrate the historical reliability of biblical revelation, showing that Scripture's claims about past events can be verified through historical research and archaeological investigation. Second, they demonstrate the Christocentric character of Old Testament prophecy. These predictions find their ultimate meaning and fulfillment in the person and work of Jesus Christ, indicating that Christian interpretation of Hebrew Scripture rests upon solid textual and historical foundations. Third, they reveal the mathematical precision that characterizes divine revelation, suggesting that God's communication with humanity can achieve remarkable specificity while maintaining respect for human freedom and historical contingency. Fourth, they illustrate the progressive character of biblical revelation, showing how later revelations build upon and clarify earlier promises while maintaining essential continuity with previous divine communication. Finally, they demonstrate the ultimate triumph of divine purposes over human opposition. Despite the persecution described in chapter 8 and the rejection predicted in chapter 9, God's redemptive plan achieves its intended objectives through means that transcend human understanding or control. The precision of these predictions, their historical fulfillment, and their theological depth combine to create a powerful testimony to the divine origin of biblical revelation. The enduring significance of Daniel chapters 8 and 9 lies not merely in their historical accuracy, but in their testimony to a God who acts within history to accomplish redemptive purposes that transcend any single historical moment. They point us toward the ultimate fulfillment of all divine promises in the person and work of Jesus Christ, the Messiah who came at the appointed time to finish transgression, make an end of sin, and bring in everlasting righteousness. The mathematical precision, historical accuracy, and theological profundity of these passages remind us that we are dealing with texts that demand our most careful attention and most serious commitment to understanding their message for both their original audiences and contemporary readers. They call us to approach Scripture with both intellectual rigor and spiritual humility, recognizing that divine revelation addresses the whole person and demands comprehensive response to its claims about God, history, and human destiny. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the videos in the series. I read all comments, so please, I look forward to your interaction.